Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our English Bible study here at St. Matthew's Church in Glendale, California. On this first Sunday in Lent, we're glad to have you with us. Last week, we progressed from Mark 12 into Mark 13. The introduction a little bit, Mark 13, we sometimes call the mini apocalypse or the mini revelation, that this is Jesus talking about what is to come for the disciples and for the world. And so it's kind of similar to the book of Revelation, almost in a synopsis form. This is Jesus teaching during Holy Week, preparing the disciples for the rest of Holy Week and for the time to come. I'm going to back us up a little bit and read some of the verses to get us back into place. We're in Mark 13, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 8 quickly. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and they will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginning of birth pangs." And we talked a little bit, and I reviewed some history about how all of these things were happening at that time, and during that period from around 30 AD to 70 AD, how many of these things were taking place in Judea, Palestine, and throughout the Roman Empire. And now Jesus is going to continue. Why don't we start down with Dalton? Would you read chapter 13, verse 9, please?
"As for you, be on your guard. You will be handed over to the courts. You will be beaten in synagogues. You will be summoned to appear before governors and kings on my account to testify in their presence."
Be on your guard, or what other translations do you have for that phrase?
Take heed.
Take heed to yourselves. That's one translation. Anything else?
You will be in great danger.
Be in danger. Okay. The language here is very emphatic. This is a warning sign along the road, but it's not like it's just a typical yellow, think of a yellow danger sign. This is a giant. Think of the emphasis there. The language he's using is very emphatic. Really, watch out. Really be on your guard. You're going to be handed over to councils like the Sanhedrin, which are sitting together, and in those places you are going to be flogged. What other words do you have for flogged?
Beaten.
Beaten. The word for beating there is you're going to be beaten so severely it's going to flay the skin right off of your bones. The skin is going to be ripped off your bones. You're going to be beaten so violently. It's also the word which is used to tan a hide. Think of how tanners have to beat the skin to get it so that they can turn it into leather. Hopefully after the animal's dead, but that beating process of just continual force against the skin is what makes leather pliable to make a coat or whatever. It's that same word of that severe a beating. This is going to be happening before political councils and before the religious council, before the Sanhedrin itself. In John, Jesus says, "These things have I spoken to you that you should not be offended. They shall put you out of the synagogues. Yes, the time will come that whoever kills you will think that they are doing God's service. And these things they'll do unto you because they have not known the Father nor me." Scholars debate when the different Gospels were written exactly. Of course, the old tradition was Matthew came first, but most scholars are pretty convinced that Mark comes first, and then Matthew and Luke build on that, and John comes in completely differently. The timing of when they're written helps us to understand them, of course, and can lead to slightly different understandings. Traditionally, we would say that Mark is written between 60 and 70 AD, and this early period, and so Mark is predicting some of these things that are going to happen. Some scholars believe that Mark is written after 70 AD, and thus Mark is writing it prophetically, but he's really reporting what has already happened so that the early Christian community can kind of process what they've seen. Jerusalem's been destroyed. How could God let Jerusalem be destroyed? And so in that scholarly viewpoint, Mark is trying to digest this for the people and explain it after the fact. That's especially important with John and the quote that I just read, in that we know that after the fall of Jerusalem, after the temple is destroyed, that's really when the separation between those who follow Jesus as the Messiah and those who do not, what we today might call Jews and Christians in a simplistic way, that split really comes after 70 AD. And so that's why John's gospel tends to sound harsh at times towards the Jews, especially the Holy Week readings, Matthew to a lesser degree too, but certainly John, because John seems to be written after that split, giving this perspective of, well, now they've thrown us out of the synagogue, the break is complete. Whether or not Mark is writing before or after that has happened, we're unsure. But those are the two positions, that Mark could be writing saying this is what's going to happen, or Mark's looking back and saying, see, this is what happened and this is what Jesus told us was going to happen. So you're going to be beaten before political rulers and even before the religious court, which is going to turn against God himself. Verse 10 down to, are we at Karen?
Who did you say?
Karen, you.
Sorry. But before the end comes, the good news must be preached to all nations.
The gospel must be preached to all nations. This is, as you might guess, an important verse for missionary activity. It's used by many mission societies. But let's take a little bit deeper look at this simple verse. It kind of echoes a more well-known verse in Matthew. Can anybody think what that might be? We call it
Commission?
the Great Commission.
The commission?
Go and baptize all nations, go and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We call sometimes this is Mark's mini commission. The gospel must be preached to all nations. And some mission societies maybe take this a little too literally to say, well, Jesus can't return yet because not every nation has heard the gospel. But I'm going to read a little bit to you from Colossians. This is Colossians 1, verse 6. Paul's writing, he says, before the word of truth, the gospel, which has come to you, as indeed in the whole world it is bearing fruit and growing, so among yourselves from the day you heard and understood the grace of God in truth. And then a few verses later, Paul continues, provided that you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which has been preached to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. Paul writes already at this time as if the whole world has heard the gospel. They've already been given a chance. Now, of course, it hadn't happened literally. What it shows us is this language is hyperbolic. Jesus is saying, get the word out to everybody. Paul is saying the word has gone out to everybody. All of this is supposed to be sharing the gospel, and it is the imperative that we continue to do so. But when you maybe hear that strain from some mission organizations, well, Jesus can't return yet because not every tribe has heard, that's not the intent of what Mark is saying. It's a call to go and spread the gospel and to continually be doing that, but in a sense, it's already happened and Jesus can return at any time. verse 11. Are we at Pam?
Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit.
Now, he's just told them, guess what? You're all going to be put on trial. You're going to be beaten. You're going to be flayed. All these things are going to be happening to you. This is a tough message that they've just received. Now, we're not at Friday yet. We're not even at Thursday night yet. Jesus hasn't been arrested. But I would think the disciples kind of have a sense of what's coming. They're seeing, I mean, they've had the high of Palm Sunday, but they also have seen all the religious leaders with this questioning. They can tell that the city's in chaos. We know from John's gospel that when Jesus gets the message to go to Bethany because Lazarus has died, and remember, Jesus kind of tarries and doesn't go right away. Do you remember what Thomas said there? Finally, Jesus, after several days, Jesus says, okay, it's time. We're going to go to Bethany. And Thomas responds to that, kind of talking almost an aside to the other disciples. And Thomas says, well, let's go with him so that we can die too. So they've prepared themselves. I mean, how do you really prepare yourselves that you're going to die a violent death soon, right? I mean, it's got to be in their heads. They're thinking this is possible, but I don't think your mind could fully wrap around this is going to happen. So they're aware, but they're not aware. Now Jesus has confirmed you're going to be going through all these horrible things. And Jesus says, but don't be afraid. The gospel message, don't be afraid. And in fact, beyond that, don't be worried beforehand how to answer these things. Don't be so wrapped up that you're trying to think that you've got to create exactly the right words that are going to take care of this situation. And why do you not have to worry about that?
Because the Holy Spirit will tell them what to say.
The Holy Spirit's going to be with you through every step of this, and the Holy Spirit's going to be motivating what comes out to say the right things at the right time. Ramona, your icon, so I'm guessing you're not going to want to read there. Let's go to Clara. Clara, you want to Oh, excuse me?
I don't know why the icon is on, but I can read.
Oh, great. Okay. So, Ramona, your video may be off. That could be it. But Ramona, you're with us. Why don't you...
There we go.
You are. Okay.
I'm in my second office.
Okay. Well, Ramona, read verse 12 then, please.
Okay. Brothers will betray brothers to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death.
Think about how awful the coming persecutions are going to be. Family members are going to be turning over family members. Think of how horrible that must be. When we watch oh, go ahead.
That seems like what's going on now.
Yeah.
In some places, I was going to compare it to if you think of the situation in Eastern Europe right now. For a lot of those people, they're having memories of the Stasi coming back and things where you had, your neighbor was going to turn you in for things. Imagine that. Then this is even within families.
That's what's happening with the Texas law.
Things, turning each other in.
I mean, it's right down here to where we're at.
To the idea of, I mean, it creates fear, and it's going to create fear in this. And what he's talking about is really fear of you can't trust anyone, or you feel at least that you can't trust anyone at that point. Clara, verse 13, if you would unmute first, please.
Hello. Okay.
Yep, we got you. So 13, Clara.
Okay, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure until the end, the same shall be saved.
Everyone's going to hate you. Literally, the world is going to turn against you for following me, but the one who endures will be saved. What other translations do you have for endure?
Stands firm.
Stands firm.
Yeah.
Being faithful.
Being faithful. The verb here is active, not passive. This is the one who is courageous in the suffering, the one who is able to take a stand and bear up under the suffering, that's the one then who will be saved. So understand, yes, you're going to be going through these horrible times, but when you get to the other side is salvation. Stand with courage, he's saying, almost in the midst of this fear and in the midst of not knowing who's going to turn against you. Stand with courage in the midst of that, because it's salvation on the other side. Now we get into something which is a little bit more obscure. Daniel, Mr. Acolyte, verse 14, please.
Verse 14. You will see the hated thing that destroys. It will stand where it does not belong. The reader should understand this. Then those who are in Judea should escape to the mountains.
So Mark seems to be passing on something that Jesus said here. Of course, Jesus didn't say, well, let the reader understand, because Jesus is speaking, not writing. So Mark's also introducing some of his own commentary at this point, based on things that Peter is saying. When you see this horrible thing in the traditional translation is the abomination that causes desolation. The abomination that causes desolation. This is it's Antichrist type language, but when Mark says, let the reader understand, it seems that Mark has something probably pretty specific in mind. And that actual phrase, the abomination that causes desolation, he's quoting from the Apocrypha, from Maccabees. Anybody remember what's the basic gist of the Maccabee stories, or who were the Maccabees?
They revolted against, let's see, was it Persia?
The Persian Greeks, yeah.
Yeah, and then in celebration of saving the temple, they lit a lamp, and they only had enough oil to last one day, but it miraculously lasted 8 days.
From which we, go ahead.
Hanukkah became the celebration.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the basic storyline there of, we call that the intertestamental period, where Judea has been conquered, they're living in subjection, and these horrible rulers are one after another, and finally it's the Maccabee family that rises up and casts them out, and the Hanukkah story. So during that time, the most notorious of the leaders, of the rulers that were ruling over them, was Antiochus Epiphanes, was his name. And Antiochus Epiphanes had a new altar built at the temple, but it wasn't an altar to Jehovah, to Yahweh, to the one God. It was an altar to Zeus. Inside the temple, he had an altar erected to Zeus, and then on that altar, he had a pig sacrificed. Now, what do you think he was doing with that?
Desecrating the temple.
He was, in the most profound way possible, trying to desecrate the temple, try to show that Israel's God was no more, the gods of the Greeks and the Romans were in charge, and everything had changed in this horrible, horrible way. Later on, Caligula is going to try and do something similar, but he's going to thankfully die before he can actually build a statue to himself in the temple there in Jerusalem. Different Roman leaders will try different things. You might remember there's emblems put up to different emperors. Finally, when the temple is destroyed in 70 AD, Titus is going to erect an idol, and Titus is the one who will cart off all the treasures of the temple. And if you've ever been to see the Arch of Titus, which is near the Colosseum in Rome, you can see engraved on the side there, it shows them carting the treasures of the temple off, and you can see the menorah from the Maccabee story being carried off to Rome from Jerusalem. All that's wrapped up in what Mark is saying here. When you see this is happening again, and it's going to fully happen again in 70 AD when Titus sets up an idol there in that spot where the temple should be, all of everything is falling apart. And so what does he instruct Christians to do?
Take to the hills.
For the hills.
To flee for the hills, to get out of Jerusalem. And in fact, we know the early Christian community does leave Jerusalem because they understand that true destruction is coming. And so the Christians are probably outside of Jerusalem when the destruction comes. Verse 13, Melissa, please.
15, isn't it?
Oh, sorry. Yes, my print's very small and I'm wearing contacts which aren't as clear. It's 15.
15. Okay. Let him who is on the housetop not go down, nor enter his house to take anything away.
Now we think, well, don't go down. But remember, they spent a lot of their time living on their flat roof. It's kind of a metaphor for get out quickly. Don't go downstairs and try to pack. Get out. Verse 16. Judy H.
And let him who is in the field not turn back to take his mantle.
Don't bother going to pack a set of clothes. Get out. When you see this is coming, get out. Verse 17, Sandra, please.
It will be an awful time for women who are expecting babies or nursing young children.
And that's during wartime. Think of how awful it is to be in pregnancy or to have small infants, and we're seeing that somewhat with what's happening in the news today, how much more complicated and how horrible it is in that situation to be dealing with that on top of everything else when you're trying to flee the city. And he builds on that, Terry, in 18.
Pray that it may not happen in winter.
Why?
Cold.
Yeah, let's not make things even worse, he's saying. Yeah, pray it not even be worse. Verse 19, Julie, please.
For those will be days of such horror as have never been since the beginning of God's creation, nor will ever be again.
Now, that's kind of the destruction that's coming there. It's right upon them. If Mark is writing this in 60, remembering things Jesus, through Peter, remembering things Jesus said around 30, Mark is writing, let's say around 65, traditionally. If this is all coming in 70 AD, what's going to happen is, yes, the Christians do largely get out of Jerusalem and aren't there for the destruction. The people who are really left there, and if you know the Masada story, where some of the people rebel and they go up on top of this mountain fortress that Herod has built, it's really largely the zealots who are going to fight the Romans, and they're maybe lifted up as religious heroes, but they're not so much religious heroes. They're kind of political fanatics, if anything, that are really going to be the ones to fight in merciless ways. But ultimately, the result is the temple is going to be torn down and the streets are running with blood. And so if you're looking at certainly as a first century Jew, it's like everything's lost. But remember that most first century Christians are also, in that part of the world, are also Jews. They're thinking, well, how could this happen? Isn't that kind of almost like the story of the Holocaust and seeing the person dying? And how can God let this happen? Where is God? The early Christians very much see that when Jerusalem falls. The early Christians are asking themselves that question is, where is God? How did God let this happen? Verse 20, let's go up to Diane, please.
If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shown them.
And Jesus says, understand, to stand there courageously in faith, to see salvation on the other side, and know that God's going to, once again, like throughout Israel's history, when things have gone bad, God's going to preserve the remnant. And that remnant will continue, and things as horrible as they are will not be as horrible as they could be. Verse 21, Dennis.
at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, there he is, do not be.
It's very typical in times of great tragedy that somebody pops up as a populist leader who is people start turning to and thinking this is the great expected one. And we know throughout this period of time in Jewish history, in Palestinian history, that different people are going to be self-proclaimed messiahs, and there'll be multiple revolutions, not just the one in around 70 AD. It's going to continue for another 60 years after that with different revolutions and people popping up and being declared the Messiah or declaring themselves Messiah and leading different revolutionary movements. Jesus says, you're going to hear this all the time, but don't believe it. Verse 22, Jean, please.
False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, the elect.
There are going to be all kinds of people are going to be trying to rise up and declare themselves the Messiah. Don't believe it. They're going to find all kinds of lies to tell you. Verse 23, Judy D.
But take heed, I have told you all things beforehand.
Jesus is letting the people know what's coming. He's doing this to prepare them so that they'll be okay on a multitude of levels. He's preparing them for the rest of that week. He's preparing them to survive past Good Friday. Of course, between Friday and Easter, we know that they lose hope, but he's coming back on Easter to restore that hope. He's letting them know that the next generations, the next decades are going to be rough. But there's hope for that too. Just as he is going to rise, there's going to be resurrection at the end, and he's preparing us for the rest of world history. That these things are going to continue to happen as evil continues to raise its head, and as false messiahs come along again and again and again and again throughout history. And it happens in all of our lifetimes. We can remember the horrible things. I can remember watching the news in Jonestown. Remember seeing that on TV? That's probably one of the most striking examples in most of our lifetimes. It's going to happen again and again and again. And sadly, when people are afraid, people get led astray. I think that's probably where we should start for today. But we have maybe a minute or two for any questions or comments.
There were big tornadoes in Iowa last night.
Yes, Clara, here at St. Matthew's, I announced the beginning of the service. My mother texted me last night. They, one of the families from their church, their house was destroyed. 6 people died, and when I mentioned Pastor Yuan Itu, anybody with a history of Salem, do you remember Yuan?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
Yuan took a call a number of years ago to Winterset, Iowa, hometown of, anybody know? It's John Wayne's hometown. If you remember Bridges of Madison County, that's...
Oh.
So Yuan is, Pastor Itu is safe, and he doesn't know if anybody injured in his congregation, but about many of his members had damage. Yeah. So that's St. Paul's Lutheran in Winterset.
Your parents are okay.
Yeah, I didn't even know anything was going on. There's almost no news coverage here, but my mother texted me and let me know about it.
How is your mom feeling?
I'm going to sign off with the recorded audience. Take care, everyone.